Good morning. My name is Jesse. I am the Assistant Director for Student Support with UTEP's Graduate School. For our folks joining us online, hopefully the sound quality is good. If you have any issues or concerns, please feel free to put that in chat or let us know about that, although we usually have pretty good luck in this space. There is not a webcam in the room we're presenting in, but it has really good sound quality. So I'm sorry that you can't see me while we're presenting, but I'm Jesse. I got a couple of folks that are joining me in the room as well. They'll be assisting with the presentation. Then I'll introduce themselves really quickly, starting with Dr. Shannon Connelly.
Yeah, hi everyone, here and virtually. I'm Shannon Connelly. I'm the Assistant Dean of the Graduate School. And I will also be with you. Welcome, come on in. I'll be with you in the Zoom room to present with the chat. So if you have any questions, if you cannot hear well the presenter, just let us know in the chat and we'll make sure we take care of that. But we're so glad you're here and can't wait to start talking about some foundations of training as a graduate student employee.
Thank you. We have our undergraduate assistant Andrea, who's over there right now scanning a couple IDs, but she's helping us out with our admin support, and then also helping us in the digital space today. We have Elizabeth, who is our doctoral assistant. Elizabeth, you want to go ahead and say hello?
Hello, everybody. My name is Elizabeth. I'm with the graduate school, and I'm happy to be here. Welcome, all of you. I hope we have a good time today.
Wonderful. Thank you. So between Dr. Connelly and Elizabeth, they're going to help keep track of anything in the digital space because I can't see the chat or the participant list, but they will make sure that as we're going through, if you have questions or concerns, that we can stop, we can have that conversation and address it through our session today. As we go through, do know that if you do have questions, if you want us to slow down on something, cover something a little more in detail, we have a good amount of stuff to get through, but it is an informal presentation where we want to talk with you and make sure you're getting what you need out of it. So feel free to ask questions, raise your hand, shout it out, put things in the chat. We'll stop to address those as we go through today. Sound good? Excellent. All right. Anything in the chat? I got a couple things. Anything that is a concern before we get started? No, I think we're hearing you well. Wonderful. Awesome. Thank you. All right. So make sure my clicker is working. Going. All right, so today's purpose, the reason you all are here, and again, thank you for being here for TARAGA Foundations, or TARAGA Foundations, as I like to call it. So our purpose today is to really help equip you to be effective graduate student employees and give you the skills to be successful and feel confident in the work that you do. And hopefully to then be able to maintain these positions or get additional offers and give you the professional skill set to feel like you're excelling at what you're doing, right? And so today is some baseline information and good tactics to help you be able to do that. We're going to discuss time management today, personal and professional ethics, which is a topic near and dear to my own heart, professional communication, and then we're going to talk the basics of classroom management for our folks that are TAs, right? Now, if you're currently a GA or an RA, it's still good to learn a bit about the classroom management skills, then because you may eventually be a TA in a classroom, or if you're wanting to be a professor and maybe you're running a classroom later on, you're going to want to have some of these baseline skills to make you effective in those environments, right? And so even if you are not currently in that role, I encourage you to pay attention and engage in that session as well, because it's good general information that can help you later on down the road. So we're going to start off, though, with just a bit of group conversation. And so for our folks that are attending virtually, I want you to just put in the chat, shout this out. What is your biggest challenge right now, right? We're going to take just a couple of minutes for that. Just think about it and then dump it in the chat. My biggest challenge is blank. My biggest challenge is apparently holding onto my clicker because I just threw it at the floor. For our folks in attendance here today, I'm going to have you answer a different question. Just pair up, and what do you anticipate your duties to be as a TARAGA? Make a list for us, and then we're going to share that back. Sound good? And I'll have you intentionally split up. I know some folks came together, so we'll just go like that. Take a couple minutes, chat with one another. Make sure you also introduce yourselves for the folks in the room. A little harder to do that in the online space, and that's okay. So let's just kind of share the biggest challenges. So what did we learn? For our folks in the room, shout it out. And we have pretty good sound quality, but try to project, use your classroom presentation voice for this. What are the duties you anticipate as being an RA? What did y'all talk about? Grade papers? Yep. STAs? What other duties do you anticipate having? Well, I think that would be excellent. Different environments, but very similar tasks of working with students and helping educate them, right? Mentoring these young undergrads, right? Any other thoughts on what duties you anticipate in these roles? I heard more out there, so I know y'all talked about more.
As a GA myself, I have to be creating constantly social media flyers and be constantly updating our website, meaning LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and our YouTube website carousel. So that's something that I anticipate to do more.
Yes. All of the older folks have to rely on all you young folks to actually do social media because we don't know how it works. Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts on things that we'll be doing as TAs, RAs, GAs? The mentorship piece and bringing those undergrads along so they can see themselves as maybe someday filling your role, right? And that's huge. I love that we go to that place. Like we start off, like I asked the room, like, what do we think we're going to be doing? Grading papers. But then as you dig a little deeper, we dig a little deeper and we talk about mentorship, we talk about leadership, we talk about working with students, right? We talk about real tasks, admin stuff that will actually positively impact the work that we do, right? And so I want to illustrate that for these graduate student employee roles, you all are very important. You will have an impact on the institution and on your programs and your departments. And then we want you to see yourselves in those roles. Our folks online, if I can get Dr. Connelly, can you kind of just share back a little bit what you saw as some trending in the challenges space? Absolutely. Those are some real things, right? And I appreciate the frankness of, time management, communication, being where our brains are going. Because those are real issues and concerns as you're stepping into these roles. Y'all are busy people. You have busy tasks ahead of you, and finding balance is going to be tough. And also the strategies you've used for time management in the past may not really serve you well in these new roles. And that's okay, right? It can feel a little bit like not meeting my goals and not doing what I used to. Maybe I'm not as strong a student as I used to be. A lot of self-doubt can creep in those moments, right? But the reality is you're in different environments. Your tasks are harder. And so you have to change with those times and those tasks. And so hopefully we'll give you some tools to be able to do that. And we'll talk about that. I think actually time management is where we're going first today. So thank you for sharing on that. And again, if you have questions, thoughts, you want me to do anything a bit slower, work through things today, let me know. I'm happy to settle in to a different topic or kind of like zero in on things to get more feedback as we go through it. What you're going to find is some of our sessions are kind of like mini versions of longer sessions that we do to give you this primer and baseline. And so hopefully that is helpful. Or if you want to expand on something, you can also attend a follow-up session later. And time management is a good example of that, where we're going to have a mini session. Hello, welcome, come in. So the first foundation we're going to be talking about is taking care of ourselves, right? When we think about time management, I want you to think about it from the lens of how are you being good to yourself in what you do? Because if you are struggling with the time management piece and you always feel overly stressed, you're not taking care of yourself, you'll be less effective, right? And so we have to think about the strategy we use in order to do that. So I like to think of this as less about balance and more about prioritizing your personal and professional well-being, right? We often chase this concept, this idea of balance, right? I don't think that is the healthiest thing to think about finding balance, because you have to recognize that sometimes things will be imbalanced. And we get kind of enamored with the idea of we have to have balance. You see other people that they seem like they have it all figured out. They're well balanced. They're able to go to the gym in the morning at 4 a.m. and then go be a TA and then go to their lab and then stay up till 2 and somehow they're just balancing it better than I am, right? I like to describe this as a lot of folks you're going to see that seem like they have it all put together. They are a duck floating on the water, right? When you look at a duck floating on the water, everything is good. They're just floating along, right? What you don't see underneath the water is the duck's legs just kicking furiously to stay above the waves, right? That's how we often are. And so we have to think about how we prioritize our personal and our professional well-being, right? And so that is identifying time management strategies that work for us, because not everything works for every person. There's no magic ticket I'm going to give you and say, this is how it's done. Here's the key to time management. You have to figure out what works for you as a unique human being. You have to stay connected and ask for help with your peers, your mentor, the faculty running the class in the laboratory. Be communicative about what you're experiencing and how you can seek help. And then Communicate clearly and professionally at all levels, and we'll help you get to those spaces. So again, I want to step away from the idea of work-life balance, right? And your TARAGA position really does that job, right? It's an academic job, it's a student-centered position, but it's the work that you're doing, right? The other job that you have is being a successful student, right? That's what you're really here for. And so, and then you have all the other lenses of yourself that you're doing as a human. And so how are you integrating that as opposed to thinking about balance, putting things in discrete boxes and then having everything even out on the scales, right? And so it's a focus less on work time and personal time, and more about thinking what is the best time to do a task. Now, for some folks, they may study best in the evening, and that's where they dedicate their time and they block it in. Some folks may study best in the early morning. That's where they need to block their time and try to focus on that, right? Find the best time to do the task that suits you, right? Knowing that we don't always have an option where you're assigned your work hours and your class maybe when you need to do it, and where you can fit in time to do the studying, maybe where it fits, but wherever possible, trying to find out what's the time that works best for you. How can you do that? And not trying to push yourself outside of that, right? If you're not a person that functions well, staying up really late, make sure you get to bed early on time, right? Don't burn those extra hours in the evening and then be dragging the whole rest of the next day when you could get to sleep at a good time, wake up a bit earlier, and be more productive during those waking hours when you're at your best, right? So what is the best time to do a task? Think of everything you do as a part of a whole. It's not just little discrete boxes. So how are you doing all of that together? And then really try to minimize the idea that things are competing, right? Everything has to function together. If things aren't functioning together, you need to seek out some help, some conversations, and find out what's working, what's not. Does a responsibility need to be shed from what you do, right? I had a recent conversation with folks in a student organization that were really struggling to find their why and their purpose, and were overstretched. And the conversation is, why are you here doing this task? Is it the best fit for you? Or are you here because of an obligation or a resume builder, right? And if you're overburdened, what are you cutting and moving on from? And that's okay as well, right? Where you can. Make sense? So reframe your thought from the jump. It's not about finding this balance. It's about integrating everything together, being a holistic person in what you do. From there, once you kind of reframe that, there's a couple strategies that you can put into place. So you can see it a little bit better for folks online. And so I'm going to give you a couple different ideas on how you can manage your time, right? And not everything is going to work for everybody. You may be applying this, maybe you've tried it, maybe you haven't. But the first one is Covey's prioritization matrix. Okay, this is a really good one. If you are a list maker, if you're heavy into prioritization, you like to have that thing down in paper, this can be a great way to actually make sure you make progress on that list, right? And the idea is that you actually write out, this is what I'm doing. This is the tasks that I have over a long term, not even just over the day. And then you actually figure out what their priority is and where you work on it. Right? And so in the kind of urgency scale and the importance scale, you have 4 categories that get made, right? You have your things that are in the top corner on the right side, urgent and important, right? So if you are working on a project that is due that day and you have to finish the edits, that is urgent and important. You do it right then, right? Now, the natural tendency is that that's a high stress project is to go and do something else, right? I have to finish the edits on this paper and submit it by midnight. I'm going to go fold some laundry. I'm going to check and respond to emails. You're avoiding the task, right? If you prioritize it, you map it out and say, I have to do this now, you make progress, you get that done, right? Moving on, the urgency category is still very urgent, but not as important, right? You do those later or you delegate those tasks, right? These are the things that like, I need to do it, but it's not something, it has to be done right now, but I can get away with not doing it if I need to, right? So we compartmentalize, we put those, do them later, or delegate those tasks, right? If you have something that is moving to the bottom category in the urgency, that is very important, so on the left side, but not urgent, you create a plan where you do that next, right? This is a project that's due at the end of the semester, right? So the goal is to try and keep as much as you can in the not urgent but important category, makes progress, so you don't have too many things that pile up in the urgent and important category. If you know and set a plan for working on that paper over time, when it becomes urgent and important, it's due today, your workload is small, right? So you create a plan, you do that next and make progress, right? Last thing is stuff that is not urgent, not important. These are the time wasters. You have to find a way to eliminate those or do them last in what you're doing, right? A great example of a time waster that I'm sometimes, and I've actually gotten out of doing, but I used to be really bad about this, is email management. Not responding to emails. Those are important. I always try to get 24 to 48 hours response on anybody's email to me if I can, right? But the actual management of my inbox, deleting old emails, filing and sorting them, right? For some folks, they want to do inbox zero and they have a strategy for it. That's fine. I'm never really good at that, but it's like, I have so much to do. And then I would spend an hour just moving email files around to feel productive, right? Because I was overly stressed, overly worked, didn't prioritize my tasks well, and I was being productive. I was doing a thing. I wasn't contributing to what I needed to do, right? It was a time waster, right? So eliminate that or do it last. I no longer really worry about email management, right? I have file folders. I move things around as if it's important, it goes in a specific file folder. If I don't have a file folder, it doesn't matter. It just sits there. It's okay. I'm not going to overrun my mailbox. It's fine. Make sense? So this can be really helpful for folks that sometimes feel like they're struggling a bit with prioritizing what they should be working on, when they should be working on it, and also finding where you are wasting your time, right? And so if you sit down and you actually map out, you can figure out, I'm wasting too much time on something. This will help you prioritize. Won't work for everybody, but it's a good one. Yes, Shannon.
Question.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about, and this can be your personal definition, and maybe others have the same question, but when I look at Covey's matrix, I often struggle with the difference between urgency and importance.
Yeah.
So what feels urgent and important, I get that, because I know I have to do that now.
Yeah.
But I have trouble sometimes thinking, so what falls into the urgent but not important category?
Yeah.
Separating what's urgent from what's important. I wonder if you could say a little more about that, or if any of you have, if examples are coming to mind of like, how do I decide which one of those top categories that's fit into?
Yeah. That's the toughest category to really delineate. Because it's hard to identify something. It's like, I got to do this right now, but it's not really important that I do it, right? It's the things that will rise into your brain of like, you feel like you really need to do it right now, or there's a time frame on it, but if you didn't do it, everything will be okay, right? It's not a deadline that if you miss that deadline or if you don't work on it, you can't either come back to it or it won't negatively impact you, right? Laundry is actually a good example sometimes of that, right? Where it's like, I am out of laundry, and I need to wash my laundry, right? Now that's a personal care, you got to do that, right? But do you stop working on the paper that's due at midnight to go fold and wash the laundry, right? It's an urgent need, right? But it's not really important in the moment. You can wear a pair of dirty underwear if you need to. Make sense? But yeah, that is the hardest one, because you won't see too many things that land into the urgent but not important category, right? But there are things that sometimes will feel, because of a deadline, that it's very urgent that you take care of right now. But in the grand scheme of what is important to you, it's not something you have to worry about, right? It may be something where someone else has asked something of you or put something on you where they're setting a time frame, and then you feel compelled to give away your time to them, right? But is it truly important? Good questions, right? But yeah, that's the hardest one to define. Not a ton of stuff will fall in there. Most things will really need call it down. Like that's a deadline. I got to do it right now. That deadline's way out. I need to work on it consistently, or I'm wasting time on something. Most things will fall into those three categories. That helpful?
It is.
Okay.
I'm thinking too that you said important to you or
Right.
important to me, so that there's probably a little bit of a personal definition, and you have to negotiate, is it personally important or professionally important? So there might be even like some overlap or
Yeah.
a double trip.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Any other questions about Covey and his matrix? I'm trying to remember. It was either Eisenhower or Roosevelt that used this a lot. I can't remember which one. I should have looked it up beforehand. I am the king of that. Always knowing that someone did something or a quote and never looking it up in advance and remembering in the session. Oh yeah, I was going to look that up. Hold on. Yeah. The next one I'm going to talk about is a really good strategy, is the MIT method. Not Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the most important task strategy. This is actually the one that I use the most. I used to try Covey's matrix, and I found that like what I was doing is I would keep that scheme in my brain, but I'd never write it down. I'm not a list maker. I have ADHD. I don't like writing lists. I never come back to them, right? My focus is a bit different. Although I'm very organized, I focus differently, I organize differently. MIT has actually been very effective for me because it's a little more simplified, right? The key with this, though, is that you have to be ruthless in how you apply it. So with MIT, you designate 2 to 3 tasks each morning that must be done. That if you finish those 2 to 3 things, your day is a success. And then you immediately separate that from your to-do list and you start working on that. That's your focus. You get those done first, set artificial deadlines for yourself on MIT and say like, I need to have this done by noon so I can move to the next thing, right? No one's holding your feet to the fire on that noon deadline. You've created it, but you know you want to have it done. And then you push other things that are not what you're working on to the side. Now recognize that you have competing responsibilities. And so you may set out your MITs at the beginning of the day, then your faculty member may come in and give you a different set of MITs, and you have to renegotiate that. That happens, right? But for the most part, what you're trying to do is figure out these are the 2 to 3 things, no more than that. You have your to-do list of things you're doing, right? Laundry, calling mom, all those different things. But it's like today, I have to grade those papers. I have to prepare for that lab tomorrow for the students and get the reagents ready. What is the most important thing for me today that I get done? And if I've done it, it's a success. This has helped me personally with one, having better job satisfaction. Because I feel like I know, like, you know what, I got what I needed to get done today. I may have not gotten everything done on my to-do list, but these 3 things had to be done. I got them done, right? So I have better job satisfaction. I'm also more efficient in getting rid of the time wasters because I know my 3 things that I have to get done and I prioritize them, right? I work in my smaller tasks around those. So as I knock off a big task, I then go and look at my smaller task where I've got 15, 20, 30 minutes to work on it. I get that done and I move to my bigger task. Cool? So this one, it's very simple on the surface. It's all about how you apply it, right? And so if you think about it as like, oh, it's just making a list and putting things at the top of it, if you don't actually apply the strategy of being ruthlessly focused on that time initiative, it will not be as effective for you. But for some folks, this can be really helpful. And I found it to me, the most effective for my own time management. Questions about MIT? Lastly, as far as like time management strategies, we're going to talk about time blocking. And some folks, again, you may already be thinking you're doing this, or you may already be doing it in practice. Again, with time blocking, when you're really applying it, it is about being very specific with your time, not just, I've got some meetings on a calendar, right? And so when time blocking is most effective is when you really look at every day and you schedule out everything you're doing on that entire day. Which for some folks, they really dislike that. They don't like the lack of freedom, or it's like it feels too micromanaged. Other folks, they fall in love with the idea of time blocking because it allows them to put everything where it needs to go, feel like they have a plan for the entire day, and address those challenges and meet them, right? Now you have to be flexible. Something might come up. I encourage you not to be rigid in what you do. But for folks that really like a plan, this can go really well, pair really well with making your to-do list of actually blocking out your time. What's important with this though, is that you do need to make sure you schedule in not just the important tasks, but the human tasks you have to complete. You need to eat. You need to have some personal time. You will not be at your best. You will not function well if you cut those things out. I can recall early in my professional career where I thought the way to be successful was to be skipping all of my meals and always running, always doing something. And I found that at one point I literally stopped. It was like 3 years into my career. I realized that 2 of the 3 meals I ate every day were in bar form. I woke up in the morning, I grabbed a cup of coffee, I grabbed a Belvita breakfast biscuit, I ate it while walking to work. At lunch, I went to the convenience store, I bought an energy drink and a power bar, and I ate that, and I kept working. And I had been doing that for a while. And I stopped literally one day and I'm like, what am I doing? This cannot be good for my health. And I was burned out and I wasn't a good employee. So I stopped. I started marking in, this is my lunchtime. I need a good breakfast. I need a good lunch. I'm going to take time to take a break. My productivity went up. So the way this may look for you is you may have something where you're literally marking out, an example here on Monday, where 8 a.m., you're starting early morning, you're prepping for your classes. You have class from 9 to 11, so you have a block there, gives you time to pass between classes and things like that. At 11 o'clock, that's when you're going through your email and you're checking up on your to-do list. So you're marking off specific discrete times to do that. It's actually really helpful to mark off times when you check your email. Otherwise, what will happen is whenever you have free moments and stuff, to avoid doing other tasks, you'll check email or do something like that, or scroll Facebook or Instagram, as the new kids do. So specific times, this is when I check email. And then I close my email and I go back to work. And then I come back and check my email specific times a day. At noon, lunchtime, go eat your lunch. 1 o'clock, specific project editing time is assigned. Class from 2 to 4 or 5. An RSO, registered student organization group meeting in the evening at 5 o'clock. Scheduled in time for dinner at 6. A pharmacology exam, so this person's a pharmacy student. So a review session from 7 to 9. A little bit of Netflix at 9 o'clock. In bed by 10. Everything that this person really needs to do is accounted for in the day, right? They have their class time booked in, their prep time, their study and project editing time, their time to contribute to their student organization. So they're doing some professional development and filling their bucket that way, studying, and then some personal time for themselves. Block everything in and give yourself those times. This also helps you figure out where you're wasting time, right? And so a good way to start time blocking is to first do a time study. That's where you take a schedule for a week and you just record what you do at different times. You don't set a schedule, you just record, yep, this is what I'm in class. And then after class, I sat and I checked email for 15 minutes. And then I was here and I scrolled through Instagram or I watched TikTok. Record the times when you do things and how much time you spend on doing it. And then you can figure out where am I wasting my time and where can I reallocate that time, right? But I also want to don't think about everything that you do just for you as wasted time, right? You want to manage how much social media you consume, but consuming social media is not just a time waster, right? If you need some minutes to take and disengage and break from what you're doing, it's okay to engage in those things. But how much time are you spending on it? Are you doom scrolling for 2 hours? Or is it 20, 30 minutes and then you jump back into something else that fills your bucket? So this is time blocking, also really effective, but for some folks, really scary. They don't like it. I'm very much set a schedule on a professional level for my Outlook calendar, but I don't necessarily like time blocking, and that's okay. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, for some folks, like it's their jam and it works. Roll with it if it works for you, right? But if you do time blocking for all and you're like, I don't like this, think of something else. That's okay. And so then now moving from the strategies for how you manage your overall time, we're going to talk about how you can really use your time well when you are studying, working on a project, anything like that. It's the Pomodoro technique, which is little tomato. And so it's actually based off of someone who kind of used a little tomato timer, a kitchen timer, to utilize their time well. And what essentially you do is you choose a task you're working on, whatever it is, grading papers, writing your own paper, studying, something like that. You set a 25-minute timer. And again, it's important to actually have one. You can download apps for this, or just get an actual kitchen timer. And you set yourself 25 minutes. And then you dedicate your time to that 25 minutes. Nothing else. You don't have your phone available to you. You're not checking email when you're doing those things. 25 minutes of dedicated time to that task. When the timer goes off, you take a 5-minute break. Then you set another 25-minute task if you haven't finished it. After 4 rounds of doing this, you need to take a 15 to 30-minute break. Now, what this does is psychologically, this helps you really focus in on, I need to do this task. I need to make progress on it. So you give yourself permission to do that and free yourself from distractions. But you also give yourself time for breaks, right? And so it eliminates those tendencies to open your email and I got to respond to a couple of things, right? Or I'm going to check my phone and look at some memes for a couple of minutes or something. You focus in, and then you have your moments when you do that, and you circle back in, but you give yourself a longer break so you don't get burned out in what you're doing. This can be really effective for making progress on something, right? You need to finish a chapter in your dissertation. This can be great to help you keep moving through that progress so you don't just kind of start staring blankly at the screen. Sound good? Not the only time management strategy to try, very popular. Related to this, kind of, I see that it's become very popular is the study with me videos on YouTube. And then when you use one of those where you find them, and you can find like 4-hour blocks of people who have recorded them just kind of sitting, studying with some background noise. It's a fascinating new like concept for me. But the study with me stuff can be really helpful. I think about, you can find some that also relate to this, where it's like in these blocks. So something to think about. Last thing on time management is stress management, right? And know that the two are highly related. If you are having trouble managing your time, your stress level will go up. If you're not managing your stress well, your time management will suffer. And so in order to do this well, we want you to think about both, right? And so for stress management, make sure you have a healthy schedule for your sleep and your diet. Make sure you're taking care of you. Look at ways to mitigate stress. Maybe that's guided meditation. If you like that, there's a lot of great videos for that online. Mindfulness activities can be very helpful for this, whether it's coloring for mindfulness or other things like that. Yoga and exercise can be really great for that. You don't have to be a fitness guru to go and do those things. And they just contribute to an overall better sense of self. And then utilizing the counseling and psychological services resources on campus. I encourage everybody to do that. Check what they have available. As students, you pay for this through your student fees. And you will not always be in an environment where you have that ready access to mental health resources. So I encourage you to use them while you're a student. If you scan the QR code there, it'll take you to their website. You can see all the things that CAPS has. They have sessions you can attend, whether it's group sessions or in-person counseling sessions, but they also have a whole section called CAPS to Go that has a bunch of resources you can just take advantage of on your own. So if you're looking for those mindfulness activities, meditation things, or other ways to help you cope with stress, there are other things that you can do on your own in addition to the more active, go talk to a counselor type of thing. All right, so that is the time management section. I'm doing okay on my time management with that. We're going to move into the second foundation, which is sound decision making. But before I do that, I want to check to see if there are any questions in the chat or in the group. Anything we felt like we wanted to cover a bit more. I know time management was a big challenge we were voicing. Before I go on.
in the chat, there are no specific questions at this time, but
Okay.
folks are agreeing that there are a lot of time wasters in our lives. So I think we
Yeah.
find the presentation very useful.
Glad that we could be help on that. Thank you, folks. And again, if you do think of a question later, jump in the chat. Let us know. Folks in the room, same thing. Right. So we're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to talk about decision making. Right. Hopefully at some point, folks have talked to you about ethics in decision making. If I'm the first person to do that, oh boy. But I'm going to dig into that. And again, this is something that actually, for some reason, I find very interesting. And so if you don't, oh well, you're stuck with me for a little while on that. But it's important that we develop some really good skills related to decision making, because as you move into these roles where you are working with undergrads, you're working with faculty, you're in this college environment, and you move into the professional environment somewhere in the future, you're going to be faced with ethical dilemmas, gray areas. And you don't want to be trying to figure out in that moment, what's your lens for addressing that? You want to be thinking about it now and figuring out how do you move through an ethical decision so you don't end up in a bad situation that lands you on the news, right? I don't know if anyone else subscribes to Inside Higher Education's like daily posts where you get the news stories, right? But every other day in the Quicklies, there is a news story about a staff member or a faculty member behaving badly. They did not make good ethical decisions, and it cost them severely. Type in Michigan State head football coach. Read that story. You'll find someone that is making awful, horrible, unethical decisions that are negatively impacting people, and it cost them $80 million. Make better decisions, people, right? And so you want to be equipped with ways to avoid that, right? And again, some things seem very simple, but it's not always that simple. So first, we're going to arm ourselves with some definitions, right? We talk about professional and ethical conduct, right? So ethics first, that's the moral principles that govern a person or a group's behavior. So when we talk about ethics, that's what we mean, right? Your decisions are based on appropriate ethical principles, character traits, professional values. Now, what denotes appropriate ethical principles and character traits and personal values all come from the internal and the professional setting. When we deal with ethics, that's what we mean. When we use the term values, we're talking about a person's beliefs or ideals that's important to them personally. Those values influence their behaviors and their attitudes, right? Not everyone has the same set of values. We have to acknowledge and accept that. We have a conversation where something seems like it's valuable and important to you. That's what you value. May not be the same for someone else. And that can impact the decisions they make. Professionalism is not your values. It's the way you conduct yourself in a workplace, right? There's a certain level of professionalism that must be maintained irrespective of values. And you might find some folks that are like, I don't necessarily value positive communication with my coworkers. Well, your professionalism dictates that you still must respond appropriately to your coworkers and use positive communication, right? Otherwise, you're in trouble, right? You would hope everyone would value that positive communication, but not everyone does. And then you have ethical behavior that kind of puts all this together. And that's acting responsibly in difficult or complex situations with quality, character, and sound judgment. We'd like to believe everyone will do this naturally, but it's going to take some training and figuring out, again, when you get to these difficult situations, what is actually the ethical way to go, right? And we'll actually talk about and have an ethical dilemma here in a bit where you can kind of put this into practice, right? But you've probably all heard like the conversation about, is it ethical to steal a loaf of bread to feed your starving children, right? Because a very gray area. We're going to have something a little more grounded in the work that we do, but that's what we're trying to address today. It's also important we really differentiate between our personal and our professional ethics. These are two different things, and sometimes they can be in conflict as human beings, right? And so your personal ethics include your personal values and your moral qualities, right? The contrast on the professional side is those are rules imposed by an employer in a company or a member of a department, i.e. your role as a TA, RA, or GA, right? There may be conflict between your personal values and qualities and the rules employed by your employer. Your personal ethics incorporate your family, friends, and your surroundings since your childhood. They inform your personal ethics. Sometimes you affirm those ethics from your family life. Sometimes you reject those ethics. And there's whole sets of research out there and theories around how young folks moving through the college environment either accept and confirm the familial ethics and morals or reject and move those in a different direction, right? It's actually part of the college experience is moving through that in student development theory. In the professional side, there's a learned part of your profession setting where you're trained or educated from working there that inform that, right? And again, there may become conflicts between what you've learned at home and you may have reaffirmed and what your workplace says. Examples of the personal side may be honesty, care, and sincerity. Those things are important in the professional sense, but the way they get framed there is gossiping, manage your time, be punctual, maintain confidentiality, ensure transparency where it's appropriate, right? There's a difference there. Personal ethics might include not conforming, in your personal ethics, if you don't conform to them, you may harm or hurt others, right? In the professional sense, if you don't conform to them, you may hurt your professional reputation, right? So that's the cost associated with violating those ethics. And lastly, your personal ethics satisfy your personal needs by following them. In the professional sense, when you follow your professional ethics, you satisfy your professional ambitions and needs. Does that make sense? Now, the challenge here is these may diverge. You may be in a workplace where you're asked to do something that you don't personally agree with. And you have to be able to apply a lens to say, is it ethical for me to do it? Or is it unethical for me to do it? And that gets very complicated, right? Now, without putting any opinion into the room, I will describe some recent political environments where someone was asked to, there's actually very recently they had ruled on this and whether or not the person was liable financially for this. A person who refused to file a marriage certificate for a gay couple. And they were the person in the county that had to do it. And they refused to do it because it did not align with their personal ethics. Professionally, they were mandated to do it by the state. And that caused a lawsuit, right? There's a disalignment with personal and professional ethics in that moment, right? Now, I have a lot of opinions about that person's conduct, but I'm not going to discuss them here. What I will tell you is, if you're in an environment where your personal ethics and your professional ethics are so far out of alignment that you are unwilling to do the job, it is time to find a new job. Does that make sense? And so if you're ever in a situation where you're so far out of alignment, you don't feel like you can ethically do that, you're too far out of alignment, you need to find something else to do. And that is okay. Make sense? All right. So how do we actually make these decisions though, right? We've given definitions, we differentiate our personal and professional ethics. We have to have a lens that we actually apply for decision making, right? And so when you are in a situation where you have a complex question you have to address, you need to ask yourself really 3 questions, right? And they're very easy on the surface. Is it legal or permissible? Am I going to be violating a university law or a civil law if I do it? If it is illegal, is not permissible, is not ethical, strike. You don't do it, right? You are asked by a faculty member to change a student's grade based off of arbitrary and capricious reasons, right? They don't like that student and they want to make sure they fail. that is not ethical, right? And on the surface, it's very easy. Like, that is not permissible. That's going to violate university policies. I don't want to be the TA behaving badly in the quick lease for changing these grades. Right? Then ask yourself, okay, it's legal, it's permissible. Is it equitable? Is it fair to all involved in the short term and the long term? Does everybody win in this situation? If the answer is no, it is likely not ethical. That can get difficult to answer. But again, looking at recent higher education situations, Supreme Court recently ruled that affirmative action is no longer allowed. Right? Was affirmative action equitable? The argument is that it wasn't by certain groups, right? However, looking at long history of who is able to attend college and who receives funding for college is a very different picture on equity and why affirmative action was necessary and impacted admissions positively, right? So we have questions about ethics in that situation that we're still playing out right now, which also calls in the question of the equitability of legacy admissions and what that plays into, right? These are ethical questions. Last question to ask yourself is, how will I feel about that decision, right? Would I want people to know about it? Do I want that put out on the newspaper or Twitter? Would I be ashamed if people knew I made that decision? If the answer is yes, probably not an ethical decision. If you wouldn't want your family or supervisor to know that you did it or made that decision, probably not an equitable decision, probably an ethical decision. Make sense? So it needs to pass these tests in order to move forward. And if it doesn't, I encourage you not to do that and find a way not to do it, right? If you feel like you're put in a situation where someone's pushing you to do it anyway, you need to seek resources and support, right? If a faculty member is pushing you to change someone's grade because they don't like them, you need to seek outside supports because something very wrong is happening there. Make sense? All right. So there's also there is also professional ethical conduct, right? Not just the decision-making you apply, but there is this responsibility to promote equity, access, safety, and well-being for those around you. And so again, when you step into this environment, regardless of your personal values, as a member of the institution, you have to buy into what the institution represents, right? And so we are an equal access institution. We are a DEI focused institution. We are a minority serving institution as an HSI. These are things that are emblematic of what we do. And so you need to be able to accept and move and articulate those values in the professional setting, right? There's a couple ways that we do that to help you get to buy in and understand these responsibilities. So first is community of care, that I hope you've all done. That is the compliance modules you complete, right? As graduate students, you have to do the sexual assault prevention module. If you haven't done it yet, you don't know how to find it, let me know, I'll help you find it. That's the first one, that's baseline. There's also Title IX and mandatory reporting. And so know as TAs, you're all mandatory reporters. And so if you observe a violation of Title IX, you are mandated to report that. That is sexual harassment or anything in that nature, right? Stalking, something like that. Someone reports something, you have an obligation to report it. Yes.
What are the guidelines for Title IX and who are reporting to?
Yeah, that is a great question. So I unfortunately can't go into all of the guidelines for Title IX because that's a whole other hour-and-a-half presentation. What I encourage on that is there are Title IX presentations the university offers. I encourage you to attend one. Or to follow up and chat with me a little bit after and give you a little bit more context on it. But essentially, Title IX would be any violation of sexual harassment, sexual assault, stalking, inappropriate conduct, or statements made to the individual, right, of a sexual nature that make them feel unwelcome. That's the very quick, broad definition of that, right? And so this can happen in a lot of ways in a classroom setting, right? You enter in class before class starts, you have two students in front of you and they're chatting, and you can tell by the conversation someone just divulged and basically stated something that is sexual harassment. Or that person is being stalked by an ex-boyfriend and they have just articulated that I have overheard the conversation. You have a duty to report. Reporting is done through a form on the Title IX website. And so there is a form for reporting, and then you'll be contacted by a Title IX coordinator. Depending on faculty and staff, they have different folks. But there's a couple different folks on campus that do that. But the main thing is to look at the Title IX website and then go to the reporting form. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Excellent. That's a great question, though. And again, I encourage folks, Title IX is, you want to make sure you are on the right side of all of those. And so I encourage you to read the Title IX website, go to a training on it, make sure you feel comfortable with the content on that. Because again, that's a situation where it can get very gray very quickly and you won't know in advance. Like, again, you're not going to find out like, I have an appointment at 3 o'clock where a student is going to come in to my office hours and tell me they were sexually assaulted. But that can happen in your role. And you want to be prepared and ready for how you navigate that conversation and how you talk to the student and then report that up in the future. Telling your faculty member does not constitute reporting. When you tell your faculty member what that now that means is you and your faculty member need to report it to Title IX now. Does that make sense? Yes.
You just answered my question.
Yes. Yeah. Telling your supervisor does not constitute reporting, right? And again, if we think about relatively recent major instances where, you know, that didn't happen. If you think about the instances at Penn State, right? There was a GA football assistant who observed horrifying behavior that reported it up to the chain of the head coach, but didn't report that to Title IX of the institution. And that is where the violation happens there, right? And those kids didn't get the support they needed because it wasn't reported, because it went up and stopped, right? And everybody's liable on that chain for not doing it. All the way up through the president who lost his job for it, right? And so you have a duty to report, not just a liability. Yes.
Oh, you go ahead.
I have a question for this because I have conflicting thoughts with this with the monthly reporting. Because I understand that yes, if we don't report, we can get penalized or anything, but however, what about the person? What if the person doesn't want me to share? What the person's not giving me consent to share? Sure. And maybe because only for a lot of reasons. And to share something, I may be putting the person through something that she or he doesn't want to go through, and it may be, in the end, it may not be helpful for the person. Yeah. So in that case, how should I approach that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this also gets to the root of what we talk about personal and professional ethics, right? Because I hear you, and I have done Title IX stuff for a long time. I used to be working in housing and residence life as an assistant director over there and train RAs. And the resident assistants are very likely to interact with this and have this happen, unfortunately, right? Given the nature of the work that they do. We have to have the conversation of, we appreciate and understand that the individual you're talking to may have shared something, and then you tell them you have to report, and they're not happy with that. And that is unfortunate because you still have an obligation to report. That person can choose not to follow up, right? You let them know it's going to happen. Title IX is going to reach out to you. If you don't want to talk to them, you don't have to. You don't have to talk to the police. You don't have to talk to Title IX. But I have to report this. Legally, I have to report it, right? What I also share with you all is that if you're in a situation or a conversation where your spider sense starts tingling, you're like, they're about to tell me something that is going to be mandatory reported. It's okay to ask them to stop for a second and explain that you're a mandatory reporter and let them know, like, hey, like, I want to be here to support you. Based on what you're about, kind of the direction of the conversation, I feel like you're about to tell me something that's going to fall in the mandatory reporting guidelines. And I want to be here to support you, but I want to know if I want you to know that if you tell me something that is mandatory reportable, I have to do that. And they can choose whether they want to continue the conversation or not. They're like, well, I don't want to continue the conversation. That's okay. Can I give you some information on other resources where you might be able to find a confidential resource where you can have this conversation and not be reported? CAPS is the confidential resource. and the Campus Advocacy and Resource Education Care Office. They're the only two that are confidential, right? And so you have to be able to get, that's difficult to do, right? But being able to navigate that conversation and be able to put it on pause and say, hey, I want to support you. I'm not a counselor and I'm a mandatory reporter. I will have this conversation if you want to continue, but know that I will have to report it if we talk about certain things. Does that make sense? Because you're right. It can be, and it's very common, folks, like, I don't want you to tell anyone. I appreciate that you don't want me to tell anyone. I don't have a choice in that. Right? And I've experienced that many times where someone comes in, they sit down, they start talking about it, and they're talking about their boyfriend stalking them, right? It's like, I have to tell someone about that. I don't want you to tell someone. I appreciate that you don't want anyone to tell them. I'm going to get you the support resources you need. I don't have a choice. Yes. Best practice is to let them know. Yep. If you feel like telling them will compromise your safety, then you don't, right? I've also been in that situation where someone reports something and I'm like, I'm not confident that if I tell them that I won't be putting my safety at risk with this individual in the room right now. But best practice and most supportive thing for the individual is to tell them, right? These are good questions. Yes, go ahead.
What's the scope of people that I have to report? Are my students or anything that I combine all with?
Anything that you would observe. Yeah, you're a mandatory reporter, right? And so if we were in this classroom right now and we heard out in the hallway a fight start, and I walk out there and I see what appears to be a romantic couple engaged in a fight and someone gets slapped, we have to report that. I would have to figure out everybody in this room who has observed it. We have to file a report, and then Tyler and I may want to talk to everybody, depending on what you observe, right? Yes.
If an incident were to happen in the classroom where the professor did not have knowledge that it happened, but us as TAs saw the action happen,
Sure.
do we have to let the professor know of what happened and that we're going to report to Title IX, or do we just strictly report to Title IX?
My recommendation there is to talk with Title IX and get their guidance. And it's always a good practice, right? And do that quickly, right? Not a week after, right? There's something, maybe you intervene, maybe you don't. You're saying, I'm just concerned about this. Talk to Title IX, and they will give guidance on what you should do next in that situation. And they may tell you to have a conversation. They may not. They may say, we will have a conversation. There's a lot of ways that go depending on the situation. But in general, best advice, if you're ever concerned, there's a report form you can submit, but you also can talk to the Title IX office about those types of things and ask questions. And I know the coordinator over there, Carmen, is amazing. Cool. Great questions. And I appreciate y'all for asking them. I do encourage you to attend a Title IX session to get clarity on this, though, right? We can mention and talk a little bit about Title IX. I say all this with letting you all know I am not a Title IX coordinator. I've just worked in and around Title IX for my entire career. And so I'll give you good information, but I encourage you to get it from the source and make sure you do it well, because this is the kind of thing that's not just about, oh, we kind of didn't do it right and then we learned from it. This can have not only real personal impact for the folks you're interacting with, very real professional impacts, right? I don't believe it's students that are on the hook for the Texas bill that would get them jail time, but we are, right?
Any employee.
Any employee, so they're on the hook as well. So yeah, so the Texas bill essentially not only like you don't report, like you're fired and you are potentially criminally liable. You got to be good at it. That makes sense? So it's worth your time to go and spend an hour and a half with Title IX to feel comfortable in this environment.
Let's see if I may.
Yeah, absolutely, sure.
I would just kind of build upon that. These are fantastic questions, and Jesse's really good at talking about this because, as he mentioned, he's spent his career working in this space. He's attended trainings, but I didn't come into that when I came to my job, and it can be very intimidating, right? You're thinking about these very serious situations, think about your own professional role on the line. When in doubt, report. It's very easy. I put the link in the chat for those who are virtually attending as well. Thank you. Our Title IX office is awesome, and those trainings are so good. I did one, and I felt so much more comfortable. even thinking about approaching a situation, and then I have had to put it in practice in my professional life. So couldn't encourage it more. The trainings are really good and they offer them frequently.
Yeah. I will take a slight left turn on that, or diversion, to illuminate another topic where you have a duty to report and also important to get some additional training. If you have not gone through suicide prevention training, seek it out with our institution through CAPS. Again, in your roles working with students, students will see you as mentors, as aspirational people they want to be like. They will have a good relationship with you. You may be the person that they come in and just word vomit to, that they're not having a good time and they're thinking about suicide. And you want to know how to respond in that moment to support them, and what resources are available on our campus, and what your reporting responsibility is for that. And as intimidating as that is, as someone who was also a suicide prevention trainer for a long time, the reality is the answer is actually really simple. I'm here for you. I'm going to connect you to resources. We're going to get you in to talk to somebody and make sure you get the support you need, because I'm not a counselor, right? The biggest mistake is saying, let's keep this between us and I will be your counselor. No. So again, good foundational skills to have would be going through CAPS training on suicide prevention training as well. Highly recommend. And they have a great staff over there as well. Other places that help us with our professional and ethical conduct and keep us accountable and help us serve students well. The Center for Accommodation and Support Services. These are the folks that will process any accommodation in the classroom or in the work setting for our folks. And then the Campus Advocacy and Resource Education Office, which I mentioned. So October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. You're going to see a lot of stuff about Go Purple and DVAM. The graduate school participates as a foundational member in DVAM. CARE is the office that coordinates it. And it's all about advocacy and support. CARE's office, their actual mandate comes from a grant that they are here to serve any student who's been a victim of a crime. That's their umbrella, right? Most often they work with folks that are victims of crimes that are like sexual assault, stalking, dating violence. But they also provide support for students. They were robbed and they feel uncomfortable on campus now, right? It doesn't happen a lot. We have a very safe campus, which is amazing, right? But they're there for any student who's been a victim of a crime. And they offer confidential counseling. They're the only other office that does it, and a lot of resources related to that, right? The thing is also, you do not have to report the crime to the police to get their services, right? There does not need to be a police report for them to help you. Again, very good to know. So whether you need that resource or a student needs that resource, it's important to know about CARE and what they do. I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Connelly to talk to you about professional effective communication here, and then we'll finish up with hopefully some classroom management stuff.
I'll move the slides. Would you like to use my laptop? Sure. Okay. And folks who are in the Zoom, I think it was hard to hear me when I was sitting over in the other part of the room, but hopefully now that I'm closer to the monitor, you can hear me okay. But give a thumbs up, post a chat, and Jesse will let me know if I need to speak louder or stand closer. But this is sort of a perfect segue, because I was noticing in the chat that Leslie mentioned, as they were having their conversation about the dilemma, I would go talk to the person who offered me the TA position and let them know, which is a perfect segue for our discussion or our thinking about effective communication. And I might say effective professional communication, because it's all bound up in professionalism. If it were me and I were looking at the ethical dilemma, I would have had the same response as Leslie. Your word is very important, but communication is going to be so important in everything you do, and it takes practice and that transparency and that willingness to go there and be kind of vulnerable with someone who you maybe don't know well, who has offered you a job is tough the first time you have to do it. But I would agree with Jesse that any faculty member worth their salt, anyone here at UTEP who really wants to help you succeed is going to be willing to have that conversation, and that'll help it work out best for you. So I have a few slides, but I actually would like to ask y'all some questions, because I'm curious. I want this to be the most benefit it can be to you. And I think we have a benefit and a challenge in the fact that we have now, probably most of us in the room, grown up as digital natives, being very familiar with email communication. So in many ways, we're super effective communicators, right? We have the resources and the tools to be able to get our message out quickly. But I think that it's been my experience, both as a former graduate student and now working in graduate education, communicating with a lot of grad students, staff, and faculty, that none of us are perfect at this yet. There's always ways to improve. So I want to know from those of you in the room and then those who are in the Zoom, what's your expectation? I'll ask you your expectation first of all. If you send an email to a faculty member, how soon do you expect a response? A day, so 24 hours? Okay, so I'm hearing in the room anyway, 24 to 48 hours. You're not expecting a reply overnight necessarily, but if it's an urgent matter, you are expecting a response within probably 48 hours maximum, especially if it hasn't been found. Same in the chat? Okay. So no one's going to be happy if they get a response a week or 2 weeks later when they email a faculty member or a staff member at UTEP, right? And if we flip that, I know some of you may be very new in your TA positions where you're interacting with students, but has your sense been so far in the semester for those of you who are in those roles that students have the same expectation of you? Yeah. So that seems like something that we're all on the same page about. Here on the screen, we're saying email response within 24 hours is best practice if it can be done. I think a lot of times in the graduate school, especially during high volume times, we really try to be, again, it's that transparency. Putting especially into our high volume shared email accounts where we're having a peak time, high volume of email that we will try our very best to get back within 24 to 48 hours, responding to emails in the order they're received. That's a little bit different than when you're in a faculty role or a TA or a GA role where expectations are that, you know, it's a one-to-one correspondence and your volume is a little bit more expected and manageable. With that said, I think there's some ways to get around it. I think acknowledging response when you know you're very swamped is better than just letting something sit. So if you know, hey, I'm really busy right now, I saw this, I'm going to get to it as soon as I can. That's better than letting something go unanswered. So best practice, but don't drive yourself mad if you are in a peak time and you can't honor 24 hours. Give yourself that space. Another thing I just want to share, I guess, before we talk about some standard conventions is to let you know that I think I always have valued communication. I think that I'm a pretty effective communicator and it's something that I value, but I have gotten way better and more effective in my email communication since graduate school and since my early career. So I started out after undergrad, I went into the workforce. I worked for about 6 years and then I did my PhD, worked during that time as well, and then came back to the professional world. And when I did, so post PhD, I was back in my first professional job and I had an awesome mentor who was very kind, but she called me into her office after I sent her an email and she's like, okay, this is 3 paragraphs long. This is 3 long paragraphs. This is an email. And she's like, let's look at this together. I'm going to take the key sentence from each paragraph and then I'm going to show you how when you send an email, it's going to be 1 sentence, 2 sentence paragraphs max. I don't know if anyone else has had that experience, but sometimes I look back at my Gmail and I'll see an email I wrote to a faculty member when I was a grad student and I'm just horrified, like, oh, how did I think they were going to read that? So a couple tips that I would give you in your own communication as you're, navigating your graduate journey, right? Try as much as you can to break up the text of a long email. You may already be a pro at this, but if you're not, make sure you're getting the main question first. And really an email should have 1 main question. It shouldn't have 5. So you can send another one if there's some other issue you have to deal with, but break them up into individual paragraphs to be easy on the reader. So really think about that effectiveness of your communication. Also know that as employees of the university, as students, your personal information is protected. We're all abiding by the rules of FERPA. So we do not want to be sending confidential information by email. As instructors, you know, you have Blackboard and you have your grade book. So you're not going to discuss those types of matters with students by email. As Jesse alluded to earlier, when you're having a one-on-one conversation, if you're finding that someone is emailing you and kind of getting into more personal information in the email, it's a good idea to say, hey, can we have a conversation in office hour? Can we schedule a meeting? So make sure that you're also modeling that behavior with your students. Email is not a place for confidential information. We talked about the timing. I would also caution you, and this is something that especially you'll find as you move into the professional space, that just be really careful about the way you're using CC, BCC, particularly when you're speaking with different audiences. And we know that there are hierarchies in higher education. So some folks are very particular about where they are in that CC list. They don't know where they are in the BCC. But when you're communicating with groups that might be mixed, that include faculty, staff, and students, just be mindful, right, of those kind of professional respect, of course, professionalism, but also that we're going to be addressing folks as Dr. So-and-so, even if we call them by their first name when we have students on the copy, right? And be mindful. I've seen this happen with very senior leadership on campus. Sometimes we're in a rush and we're forwarding emails that have maybe something in the chain that we don't necessarily want to share with the person who's getting it. So things move fast, but always just, it is important to take that extra moment to make sure that anything you're forwarding, or if you're looping someone new into the conversation, that it's appropriate, right? Because our email follows us everywhere. This very first point is what I alluded to already. So most people are not receptive to a long, convoluted email of 5 paragraphs or even 3 paragraphs. You can also be creative. You can use bold, but be careful because that feels like shouting. I think if you're sending an email to a large group of people or to your students and you really want to draw their attention to remember you have an exam on Tuesday, I think it's okay to use bold in those cases, but for your professional email, keep it as short and simple as possible. And again, focusing on what's the point? What am I seeking to get out of this communication? So foreground your question or your request, get that right up top. And bullet points are great. Our dean loves the short and simple communication. So if it's hard for you, as it was for me, to move away from the long, beautifully crafted paragraph, use bullet points. It will really help. And this last point could not be more important, but a lot is lost in email communication. So I would also urge you to, many of us have access to Teams through the university, and you may or may not use it in your daily work, and many prefer Zoom. So I'm not saying that you have to have all of your video meetings on Teams if you prefer Zoom, but Teams is also a way you can have a phone call with someone, and sometimes picking up the phone is a lot more effective than sending another email because things get lost in translation. So if you feel like a conversation is going that way, seek clarity as soon as you can. And it's kind of nice to talk to people on the phone, or if you happen to be in the same building, go talk to them in person. It seems like a silly, simple point, but it will really help to clarify situations, particularly that start to get a little bit more tricky or convoluted. Don't hesitate to ask for that clarification when needed. So I think everything here hopefully goes without saying. I'm wondering, ask for feedback to identify a tone. This is probably something that comes up more in a professional setting where, again, things can get lost in translation. I'm seeing some like nods, so I wonder, I'll stop here for a second and I'd like to ask you all, have you encountered this yet in your work where maybe we can help each other? Let's workshop a little bit because you're moving between spaces. You have to put on one hat to talk to students. You have to put on a different hat to talk to your faculty as a student. And then you're mixing the space and your written communication. So I also would point back to that comment in the chat when we first started. I think it was Marco who mentioned that a major issue that they are wanting to bring to the table that is a challenge right now is navigating poor communication or less than effective communication with different, I think you said different levels of management. So if Marco wants to share a little bit more about that or even unmute and jump in, I would welcome that. But those in the room, let me know how this has been playing out for you so far this semester.
Yes, well, my experience is a little different. I've been working for over 30 years in the industry before I came back to school. So what I've seen is that sometimes, even at the campus level, there will be supervisors at a higher level that keep control of many of the parts of the information. Then they divide the information and they give some employees part of the information, some of the employees another part of the information, but they don't have them talk to each other. Therefore, the employees that receive the information will act according to those instructions and it will tell people to do things or follow plans according to those instructions they've received, but they don't have a clear picture of what the entire purpose is. So when that happens, the person at the lower level gets trapped on doing something and then immediately, or maybe after a few days, they were told something completely different. Oh, change this, do this. And then they lose track of what they knew they were supposed to do. So for them, it might feel like a loss of time. It might feel like they could use that time on something they have interest on instead of redoing what they were told to do, just because somewhere in between, someone decided to compartmentalize the information and don't share the entire picture, which I think a good leader should actually have a meeting with the different members of his team, discuss what the project is, what is the plan, what is the outcome expected, and then delegate different instructions to the different leaders.
Yep. Okay, you just presented a fantastic case study. And I have a feeling that this is something that one could certainly encounter as a TA or RA, but will be especially present for our students who are working. I mean, you described your role where you're assisting a department and you're working on projects. So you're probably interfacing with employees who are in other full-time professional roles. I'm thinking, I can't see Elizabeth's face right now, but I see Jesse's head nodding the entire time you were talking. This is something we face a lot in our professional work where we have different teams or different units within a division that need to communicate together. And I guess I would say that platforms like Teams, Slack channels, whatever your group is using can help with this, but you do, like you mentioned, Marco, need a leader who has a clear vision for what's the purpose, what is the common striving that we're all working toward. So I'm hoping, actually, I'm curious to know how this works, and it's very different across departments. So sometimes TAs will be part of a cohort where there might be like a weekly meeting led by a faculty member or maybe by a team leader. I see you shaking your head. Is that how it works in your department?
You're asking me?
Oh, in the room, 1 second, Marco, and then I'll come back to you.
For example, if it's fundamental course, I am in charge of the lab, so I'm in charge of creating the material that is going to be teach to students, learning the labs, grading, quizzes. Then if it is a higher course, for example, junior or senior students, I am part of the team cohort. So I don't decide what is being gonna be teach, but I have some freedom in deciding the quizzes, maybe suggesting questions or exercises for the exams aside from the concourse.
Okay, can I ask a follow-up question? When you came into your role, was there an orientation or a training for TAs where you got a handbook or any kind of information?
That's one of the biggest critique because I come from a family of teachers, so I know I'm familiar with pedagogical things,
Yes.
things, but I am aware that not TAs or activists come from a family of teachers, so they are doing the best that they can. That sometimes may not be the best interest for students or maybe be ethical. However, it's what they can gain knowledge.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think the last foundation we'll speak about today, we'll talk to a little bit some classroom management strategies. We won't go deep dive into pedagogy in this session. That's something that the graduate school does offer separately. And if there's interest, strong interest, we can consider when we schedule that and when that might happen in the semester. But you bring up a very good point that just to say that things differ across departments and programs, and there may be more or less preparation or support offered for the specific role that students typically have in that area. And you might have programs where most students are working as RAs and not so much as TAs, or they're working as TAs earlier on and then they move into grant-funded RA positions. Or you have places like the graduate school where we have doctoral assistant positions that are more project-based. So there's a mix. But Marco, if you could say a little bit more about the current, so what type of role do you have currently at UTEP, or are you seeking to have one in the future?
Well, I was in charge of the rocket team project management, and now I am in systems engineering. So my goal is to actually share the knowledge I already acquired within the years in a way that I can benefit other people and myself. So I see myself growing within UTEP, developing the skills that I have into new skills and learning new information and data that can help me make better decisions based on current facts.
Great. So you're bringing actually quite a bit of industry professional experience into your role as a graduate student, and that's something that you're interested in sharing back with fellow graduate students and graduate student employees. Excellent. So I think, yeah, given the mix of different types of roles that we have in the room and sort of where the conversation is heading, I think it would be good to turn to the final foundation, and we'll have time for general questions about any of the foundations we've covered so far today. But I think that will be really beneficial for you. This is a good nuts and bolts basics, whether or not you've been in the classroom recently or if this is the first time ever. Jesse has some excellent tips and tricks to get us back in that zone.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Connelly. Appreciate it. Yeah, so, and again, RA-TAGA Foundations is a lot of other sessions kind of push into a little bit of a smaller environment. So if you'd like more information on time management, professional communication, ethics of professionalism, we offer some other sessions for that. But I will put out a marker, this may be helpful as well. If you look at our individualized development plan workshop, the back half of that presentation is about how to navigate having a conversation with your mentor and seek feedback and how to receive feedback. And based on what you're describing, that may actually be really good tips that you can apply on that to what you're doing, or looking at some of our other sessions on professional communication, and we can develop some of that. Just want to throw that out there for folks on the communication side. I'm going to jump into our final foundation, which is guiding others, the classroom management section. I'll let you know we are at about 11:47. I'll probably go a bit over, and so if you need to leave the session, you're heading off to something else, that's okay. Both our in-person and our online folks. We are recording, and I will post this later, and it's good information. But if you're able to stick with us, especially if you're in a TA role, this will be valuable to you. But no, they will finish through. If you need to dip out, that's okay as we go forward. But first, and we're just going to shout this out and put it into the chat, a thought exercise. What could we do to ensure our own failure in overseeing a classroom? And when I say shout it out, I mean shout it out. Project. How could you make sure that you failed as the person running a classroom?
Not fair.
Not prepare. Good.
Not listening.
Not listening. Yep. What else? Have bad
Not
time
reading the
management.
audience.
That's a great one. Marco, go ahead.
Not reading your audience.
Not knowing your audience?
Yeah, and not reading the reactions. If you
Not
don't,
reading
then
their
you don't know.
reactions.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I will throw out, that can be really hard if you got a lot of people online and they're the little black square. That's a tough one. Other things, what can we do to make sure we fail?
Think of yourself as a student instead of a TA.
Yeah. Put yourself only in the mindset as the student, right? So what you think about some of these things? How often have you seen someone or our own selves in a room where we know that's how we could set ourselves up for failure and we do it anyway? Right? Sometimes we trip over our own 2 feet on things. And you'll see faculty sometimes trip over their own 2 feet. The things that we're going to talk about in classroom management are not groundbreaking, but they are still things that folks miss. And so we're going to talk about how you can avoid that and put it into practice by just recognizing and trying to address it. Okay. I want to start off, and we're not going to get deep into the pedagogy section. We have actually a session recorded on our website for TA pedagogy where we talk about liberating structures with Dr. Lucia Dora, our associate dean. I encourage you to check that one out. We do not have time to go all the way into that, but I'm going to give you a little bit of a piece and a taste of how you can structure your classroom in a positive way using Dr. Marcia Baxter-Magolda's theory of self-authorship and the learning partnerships model. This is student development theory that is very applicable to a classroom. And the nice thing about it is it's very easy to put into practice once you really think about it, right? And so self-authorship, which is a huge section of research, and I'm going to distill very quickly for us, it focuses on just a few questions that your students are moving through as new college students. And you, as doctoral and master students, are also moving through these questions, right? Answering, how do I know something? That's the epistemological question, the nature of limit and limits of knowledge. How do I know something to be true? Who am I in the context of the knowledge I'm creating? Sense of who they are and what they believe. They're figuring this out. We talked about this early on. We were talking about personal ethics, right? The confirming or the denying of familial values. Who am I in this setting? Who am I as a person? How do I relate to others? How do I create and perceive those relationships? When you step into a classroom, you are going through that. Your students are going through that. So the first part is acknowledging they're all going through this self-authorship phase of figuring out, how do I know who am I and how do I relate to the others in my space? That is the classroom environment you're in. The partnerships model that applies self-authorship, again, has 3 assumptions you need to make when you step in the classroom. Knowledge is complex and socially constructed. There is no absolute truth, right? So you are co-creating that understanding with them in the room. You are a participant in that environment, right? Self is central to knowledge construction, right? So who I am, how I relate to others, how I know is going to determine how they construct the actual knowledge you're helping them navigate through as young students. And authority and expertise is a shared mutual construction of knowledge amongst peers, right? Just being the person at the front of the room does not give you total authority. You have to construct that through the relationship you build with them, right? And when you understand that concept, that makes your classroom management a bit easier, right? Because it may be easy to get in there and be like, I'm the TA, and that means they're all going to fall in line, right? That's not how the world works. And then that applies to then 3 practices that'll help you be effective in developing students. Validate their capacity to know, right? You're coming in, you have a higher level of expertise than they do. Don't treat them as if they are much lower than you and uneducated. They are intelligent human beings. their knowledge level is just lower than yours and you're bringing them up to your level, right? You're going to have brilliant people in your classroom that are smarter than you, right? Y'all are probably smarter than me, but I have more knowledge on this section, right? I'm going to bring you up to my level, right? That's okay. Validate their capacity to know, their capacity to affect change. Situate the learning in their experiences. Talk about what they're going through, what they're experiencing in their lab, the conversation, the dialogue, right? If I had more than 2 hours, we'd do more of that in these sessions, but I only got 2+ hours with y'all. And then mutually construct the meaning. Deconstruct what you're talking about, allow them to have their voice, and create that together, right? If you can do that, you will help them be more successful in the classroom and you will have a better experience as a TA. Make sense? That is the thumbnail sketch of Baxter McGolda. There are whole books and articles and scholarship around it. I encourage you to look into it, but it's a great way to start your thinking about being a TA, right? But that's the underpinnings of understanding of student development, right? But there is an actual practical thing of how do I actually manage the classroom I'm in, right? And this is where, unfortunately, we don't always spend a lot of time training our TAs of what do I actually do with a problematic student? How do I keep them engaged, right? Now, if you got a family of educators, you may be raised in this environment and it comes very natural. If you've never done it before, this may feel very abstract and difficult, right? And so hopefully I can give you some tools of how to effectively do that, right? And I will fully own my background. My bachelor's is in English education at the scholastic level. I was going to be a high school teacher, and then I said, I don't want to teach English. I like reading. I like writing. I don't like teaching the practice of it. I was much more invested in higher education. So that's where some of these things come from, understanding that those rules apply to everybody. An effective classroom is an effective classroom, right? So first thing is, and unfortunately in the digital space of hybrid, it's harder to do this, right? But think about your proximity. If you're not in a hybrid classroom, move around the room, right? I've been up near the center of the presentation room most of the day today to get the best audio quality. And also, previously last year, the audio quality wasn't great in this room, so I feel very compelled to come back to the center room. I actually know that as long as I project, the folks there can hear me, right? And if I move around the room and I change where I'm presenting from, one, if you're someone that always has to see the slides as a reference, if I'm presenting back here, I can read my slides and not make it feel like I'm reading from the slides. I'm also changing my proximity. So if I have a student in the back of the room that I see is nodding off, one, don't call them out and harass them on that, because who knows what's going on in their life? Did they actually get any sleep last night? Don't assume. But also, the shaming doesn't help them. So if I move into the back of the room, I may be able to help that individual be a little more engaged in what I'm doing, right? So move around the room a little bit, engage your space. Stop your off-task behaviors with engagement instead of creating a power struggle. If you see a student that you feel is on social media and is not engaging, ask them a non-threatening question in their opinion and get them involved in the conversation. Bring them in. Or you're having a conversation, you can tell they're disengaging because they disagree with the way the conversation is going. Bring them into the conversation in the non-threatening, right? Stop off-task behavior by creating those engagement moments, right? Calling them out and making a power struggle is never gonna help. I can recall very early in my collegiate career as an undergrad, first semester in an organizational leadership classroom, there was a teacher who had been a professional in the field for a long time. He was actually a great instructor, but there was one moment where I really disagree with what he did. The person behind me fell asleep in class, and he stopped his lecture cold, walked down the aisle. And I really didn't even know the person behind me. Walks right behind me and goes, leans down. Folks online, you can't see me this. Leans down, goes on the student's desk and says, if you fall asleep in my class again, you will never be in my classroom again. And stood up and walked away, back up to the front of the classroom. Do you think that student was engaged with the rest of the lecture? Absolutely not. Do you think anyone else in the room was engaged with the rest of that lecture? Right? It was about motivating employees. His organizational behavior. No, I really like this guy. But he was just not having it that day. And he was a bit old school, right? And so that's what he thought he needed to do. He created a power struggle. And he disengaged that student. And we don't know why that person fell asleep. We don't know home life, right? So don't do that. Be genuine with the folks in your class. Be your authentic self, not sarcastic, right? Don't embarrass them. When someone asks a question, you're like, there are no bad questions. Someone asks a question, you're like, oh boy, that was a bad question. Don't say that, right? Help them towards the knowledge, right? We've all asked a silly question before. Or writing notes furiously, something else gets covered. You're not paying attention in that moment. You circle back and ask the question. It's like they just talked about that, right? Don't go, we've already talked about that. We're moving on, right? Help them to knowledge. Be authentic. Don't be sarcastic with them. But you can tell some jokes. You can tell some stories. You can be a real person in the room as long as you're maintaining a level of professionalism, right? That helps build that connection. They're engaging with you in that moment. Model good behaviors. You need to be on time in your class. Things happen, flat tires, class is running over, right? But if you show up 10 minutes late to your own class because you were in line at the Starbucks upstairs, you cannot expect them to be timely. Right? So you need to model that behavior. Be on time, start on time. And also set expectations. Every professional development session that we do starts at, let's say, 10 o'clock. I notify the group, we're going to start at 10:02 because they're hybrid. And a lot of folks jump onto Zoom right as it's starting or a minute before, which is okay because no one wants to hang out for a long time in the digital space where no one's talking, right? And so they jump on right as, but that takes time to get them into the session. So we're not leaving them behind. But I tell the people in the room and the people online, we're going to start at 10:02. That's the expectation. Make sense? Gives people the time to jump in. But I'm modeling the good behavior there, but still being timely. And your organization stuff, how you do it, model that behavior, what's you want them to do. Note positive and negative behavior. So if you're charging evaluation, right? Figure out where people are doing well and also not well, and keep a log of actual notes. You will not remember, especially the positive stuff. Big ticket negative things will stick out in your brain, but you will not remember the positive stuff. So you have those moments where so-and-so did a really good job in class today. I should compliment on that, but that'll come into class participation later. I should note that. Keep a log, right? Also super helpful if you're ever like supervising folks. Keep a running log. Whether they're well, whether they're not, evaluations get a lot easier. So if you have someone to evaluate a piece, you want to know what's going on with that, right? And then address major or chronic concerns outside of the classroom, in person, from a place of care. That student is always falling asleep in class. After class, ask them if they can take the time to chat with you during office hours. How are you doing? I've noticed you're having trouble staying awake. Everything okay? And then they say, yeah, I'm not really super interested in the topic. It's a gen ed. Okay, how can we help you work through that? I need you to pay attention in class. Or you may have just opened the door to a conversation that may be more difficult, but you're coming from an ethic of care with that person, right? Or someone is consistently disruptive in class conversations. They are the contrary, always. Doesn't matter what it is, they're on the other side of the class, and they want to fight now. Why is that? Ask that question. Talk about that. Well, I thought I was just contributing to the dialogue of the classroom by always taking the counterpoint. What you're doing is derailing the conversation. I need you to know that. Make sense? Tell them what you're seeing, come from a place of care, but address the issue so that hopefully it stops. Ignoring it or getting in a fight with them in the class is not going to get you what you need. Right? So one-on-one communication often will. And when it doesn't, there are resources for that as well. So if you have problematic or troubling behavior in your classroom, then you can address through the one-on-one conversation and the classroom management strategies. It's not effective, or it's at such a level that you need to do something else with the student. There's a couple things that you can do, right? Contact the instructor of record. Let them know. Let them know early. If you have that student that's always problematic and you're working through it on a one-on-one basis, talk to the instructor of record to let them know to get feedback and advice. And also, when it continues and persists, there's a record that I've been dealing with this for a month. Make sense? But talk with them. The Office of Student Conduct and Conflict Resolution, Oscar. Someone is cheating. They're the folks that actually manage and report and address that, right? So someone cheats on a paper, it actually goes to Oscar, and they're the ones that determine the outcome. So, know how and when to report to Oscar for academic dishonesty and misconduct and troubling behaviors in the classroom. You can seek help for counseling and psychological services, TAPS, right? You can talk with them and notify them about a student concern you have. Students making comments in class that were really concerned, right? They didn't necessarily articulate suicidal ideation, but I'm really concerned about this student. What can I do to help them? How can I refer them? What is your recommendation? Make them your friend. And they're amazing, so they're going to help you, right? There's the student behavior intervention team. Dr. Connelly and I are both members of that team. Dr. Connelly is on the upper level, determining and screening students for essentially risk level, and I'm a case manager. So if a student is a grad student in crisis, they refer to me, and I work with them on a one-on-one basis to help them navigate the institution and the crisis to help them be supported at the institution, right? There is a team on campus that does that. So we're here to support you. And you can submit a report about a student of concern. Anytime you have it. Our online office, we've talked about that. I said, highly recommend register on Campus Edge, attend a time of mind session, right? And then the PD. If there's an immediate concern for health and well-being of the student, the class, or yourself, call the police, right? Now, I recognize that calling campus police is a very charged thing to do in our current context, right? You don't call the police because a student refuses to switch chairs. Or you've kicked them out of class for behavior and they refuse to go and you call the police. Nope. Right? If a student is a risk to you or others, you call police. Or even immediately they have said that they are thinking about suicide and then they leave your classroom, call the police. Let them know right then. I have an immediate concern about a student. I'm worried about their welfare, right? So understand very clearly why you would call them in to assist you, because they're here to help you. We want to make sure that it's something that is necessary for that environment, right? Does that make sense? So things that you may experience that are problematic behaviors may be things like derailing the conversation, right? Not working effectively in teams. They split up into groups. This person refuses to do that, right? Falling asleep in class. Not completing any of the assignments, long periods of not showing up to class. All of these are potential warning signs, but also signs that students just disengaging. So the best thing is talk with your students, know what's going on. Again, where you recognize negative and positive behaviors, right? If you have that student that is always in the back of the room that doesn't ever participate, and then they go 2 weeks without showing up, if they never participated, you never took note of it, you would miss them. But is something wrong? Versus a student that sits up front that engages all the time and then misses 2 classes, you know immediately they're not there. So take note of what's going on in your classroom. Look for those behaviors. That makes sense? And seek your supports and resources, right? Some things are like troubling behavior of like this person needs some help. Some of them are problematic behaviors of this student needs a bit of coaching on how to navigate the college environment to be successful. If they go long term with this, they're not going to finish well, right? So how do you help them navigate that as TAs? Cool. Now that's a lot in a short amount of time. But if you have any questions about those type of things, I'd love to talk with you more about it, or check out our pedagogy session to help you get into it. So these are things that I know you can be good at with just a little bit of practice. Okay. So in summary, and again, thanks for hanging out with us a little bit over. We got through a little bit faster, but thank you. Know that we consider you all leaders, and we expect you to set an example for the folks around you, and we know that you can do that effectively. And for every challenge or question that you have related to these roles, there is a mentor and a resource on this campus that can assist you. So you're not alone in this. You don't have to go it alone. And just because you attended one session doesn't mean you're the expert. Keep working through it. Keep coming back and talking to us about it. Review the resources. Heck, send Jesse an email and say, you told me to move around the room. It didn't work. Let's talk about it. I will do that with you. I'm here for you. All right. If you have questions, email us at grad support or email me directly at jasingleton@utep.edu. I got some business cards. Come grab them. I'm happy to give those to you. We have sessions throughout the semester. They typically happen on Fridays, somewhere between the hours of 10 and noon. Attend some of those sessions, come check it out, come hang out with us. But if you need something, let us know. We're here to help. All right. And thank you again for your attention today. Thank you for our folks online for sticking with us and asking questions and participating. Again, we will record, we will post this. If we went through something too fast, we'll have it here for you. If you need something else, let us know. I will hang around for a bit for any questions, both online and in person after. But that is our session for today. Thank you so much. Have a great day.